The first thing I noticed was the sound of Denise laughing upstairs. Not crying, not arguing, laughing. A soft, comfortable laugh drifting down through the hallway of the house I had cleaned that morning, before leaving for my cardiology appointment. I was standing in my own foyer holding a paper bag with tomato soup and fresh sourdough bread from the little bakery downtown when I heard it. For one strange second, my mind tried to explain it away. Maybe she had stopped by unexpectedly. Maybe Thomas was home early from work. Maybe they were talking in the bedroom because the television downstairs was too loud. Then I heard my husband's voice. Low, warm, intimate. The kind of voice a man uses when he thinks he is completely alone. I stood there without moving while rainwater dripped from my umbrella onto the hardwood floor. Then came the sound that changed my life forever. A kiss. Quiet. Familiar. Followed by Denise whispering, "Lock the door next time." I did not scream. I did not run upstairs. I quietly set the soup down on the entry table, turned around, walked back out into the rain, and closed the front door behind me without making a sound. 10 minutes later, sitting in my car with both hands shaking against the steering wheel, I made one phone call. When Michael Harper answered, I said, "Michael, I think you need to come home." The appointment itself had been routine. At least that was what Dr. Feldman kept insisting while he adjusted his glasses and looked over my test results for the second time. "Your heart looks stable, Carol," he said. "Blood pressure's better than 6 months ago. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled politely and thanked him, though I knew the improvement had less to do with discipline and more to do with exhaustion. The truth was, somewhere over the past 2 years, I had simply become quieter. Quieter women often get mistaken for peaceful women. Outside the clinic, Asheville was wrapped in cold October rain. The sidewalks glistened dark silver beneath the gray sky, and people hurried past storefront windows with their heads tucked down inside coats and scarves. I should have driven straight home, but I stopped at the bakery Thomas liked near Biltmore Avenue. Tomato basil soup for me. Roast beef sandwich for him. Fresh bread still warm from the oven. 27 years of marriage becomes habit in ways people don't talk about. You stop asking yourself whether love is still present and start measuring devotion through grocery lists, folded laundry, and remembering who likes extra mustard. Thomas liked extra mustard. I remember standing in line at the bakery thinking I should be grateful. We had a good life by most standards. A beautiful home outside Asheville. A daughter who adored us. Retirement accounts that looked healthy. Annual beach trips. Dinner parties. Church on Easter even when neither of us attended regularly anymore. From the outside, we were one of those couples younger people pointed at and said, "I hope we're still like that someday." I used to believe that too. The rain had picked up by the time I pulled into our driveway around 1:30. Denise's white Lexus was already there. I didn't think much of it at first. Denise had been my best friend since Emily was in kindergarten. She came over without calling all the time. Sometimes she drank coffee with me in the kitchen after yoga class. Sometimes she borrowed serving trays before parties. Sometimes she cried at my dining room table about Michael working too much. There are women you slowly become friends with, and then there are women who become stitched into the fabric of your life so deeply that you stop seeing where you end and they begin. Denise had held my hand at my mother's funeral. I had held hers after her miscarriage. She knew the code to my security system. She knew where I kept the spare towels. She knew every important date in my family. Which is why, even after I walked into the house and heard the laughter upstairs, my brain still resisted the truth. The house smelled faintly of Thomas's cologne and Denise's expensive vanilla candles. I remember that detail with painful clarity. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked steadily, while rain tapped against the windows. I called out once, "Thomas." No answer. Then I heard Denise laugh again. Not startled, not nervous. Comfortable. I walked slowly toward the stairs. Halfway up, I saw Thomas's suit jacket lying on the hallway floor outside our bedroom door. That stopped me cold. Thomas was meticulous, the kind of man who folded dry cleaning plastic before throwing it away. He never dropped clothing on the floor. The bedroom door was mostly closed. I could hear movement inside, bed sheets rustling softly, a murmur of voices too low to fully understand. Then Denise said quietly, "Your wife's appointment usually takes another hour." And Thomas answered, "Relax." There are moments in life when something inside you splits cleanly in half. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet internal tearing that changes the shape of everything afterward. I never opened the door. People always ask what they would do in situations like that. They imagine themselves screaming or throwing lamps or demanding explanations. But real shock does something stranger. It drains the body of noise. I stood there staring at the brass bedroom doorknob while my pulse thudded painfully in my neck. Then I stepped backward as carefully as if I were leaving a church service early. I walked back downstairs. I picked up my purse. I left the soup on the entry table. And I walked out into the rain. Neither of them heard me leave. I sat in my car for several minutes, unable to put the key into the ignition. My hands were trembling so badly I had to press them between my knees. Across the windshield, rain slid downward in crooked silver lines while my entire marriage rearranged itself in my mind. Tiny moments suddenly looked different. The late meetings. The password change on Thomas's phone 6 months earlier. Denise canceling girls' lunches at the last minute. The way Michael had started looking permanently tired. God help me, even Emily's words from Easter came rushing back. You know, Dad and Denise text a lot, right? I had laughed it off. Now I felt old. Not because of my age, but because of my foolishness. I finally started the engine and backed slowly out of the driveway. I drove 3 streets over before pulling into the empty parking lot of a small Methodist church. My breathing had become uneven by then, sharp and shallow. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and forced myself to think. Not react, think. 27 years with a financial advisor teaches you something about panic. Panic is expensive. Panic destroys leverage. Panic gives the dishonest person time to prepare. And suddenly, beneath the grief, another feeling began to emerge. Clarity. I pulled out my phone and stared at Michael Harper's name for a long time before pressing call. He answered on the 3rd ring over the sound of machinery. Hey, Carol. His voice sounded distracted, tired. I swallowed once before speaking. Michael, where are you? At the nursery over on Hendersonville Road. Why? I closed my eyes. Because in that moment I realized something almost as painful as the betrayal itself. He truly didn't know. I tightened my grip on the phone and looked out at the rain falling across the empty church parking lot. Then I said quietly, Michael, I think you need to come home. Michael did not speak for several seconds after I told him. I could hear machinery humming somewhere in the background of the nursery, the metallic rattle of a cart being pushed across concrete, and then silence again. The kind of silence that comes when a person's mind refuses to understand what their ears just heard. Finally, he said very carefully, Carol, what are you talking about? Rain slid slowly down my windshield while I searched for words that didn't sound hysterical or cruel. At 50 years old, after decades of marriage and funerals and raising children and watching people survive terrible things, I had learned there was a difference between truth and violence. The same facts could be delivered either way. I came home early from my appointment, I said quietly. Denise's car was there. Nothing. I heard them upstairs. The machinery noise disappeared entirely. I imagined him stepping outside the greenhouse doors into the cold air behind the nursery, one hand pressed against his forehead, the way he did whenever he got stressed about payroll or taxes. You're sure he asked? That question hurt more than I expected. Not because he doubted me, but because I suddenly realized how badly he needed me to say no. I looked down at my wedding ring resting against the steering wheel. Yes, I said. Another silence followed, longer this time. Then Michael let out a slow breath that sounded almost painful. Don't go back there, he said quietly. The words startled me because they were exactly what I had been telling myself for the past 10 minutes. I wasn't planning to. Good. I heard a truck pass somewhere near him, tires hissing against wet pavement. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Less shocked, more controlled. How long? I don't know. But you think this isn't the first time? It wasn't a question. I closed my eyes. No. Michael was quiet again. Then he said something that chilled me in a completely different way. I need to show you something. 40 minutes later, we met at a diner off Interstate 26, halfway between downtown Asheville and Fletcher. The place smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, and hardly anyone was there besides 2 elderly women eating pie near the windows. Country music played softly overhead. Michael was already sitting in a booth when I walked in. I had known him almost as long as I'd known Denise. 23 years. He had built his landscaping business from a single borrowed mower and an old pickup truck with rusted doors. He was broad-shouldered, steady, the kind of man who fixed things before anyone asked him to. That afternoon he looked 10 years older than he had a week earlier. He stood when he saw me, then seemed unsure whether to hug me or not. We settled awkwardly into opposite sides of the booth instead. Neither of us touched the menus. A waitress came by, refilled coffee cups we hadn't asked for, and disappeared again. Michael reached into the pocket of his work jacket and placed his phone on the table between us. "I found this 3 weeks ago," he said. The screen showed a photograph of a hotel receipt. "Charleston, 2 nights." I stared at it without speaking. "She told me she was at a real estate conference," he said. I knew something felt off, but every time I almost said something, he shook his head once. I talked myself out of it. I understood that completely. People think betrayal is mostly about lies. It isn't. Betrayal is about the willingness of decent people to protect the reality they desperately hope is still true. "I'm sorry," I said softly. Michael gave a humorless little laugh. "Hell of a thing for you to say to me." We sat quietly for a moment while rain tapped against the diner windows. Outside, cars moved through the wet parking lot under a gray sky heavy enough to press down on everything beneath it. Finally, he leaned forward slightly. "Tell me exactly what happened." So I did. I told him about the bakery, the laughter upstairs, Thomas's jacket on the floor outside our bedroom, Denise mentioning my appointment schedule. Every detail came out calm and precise, almost like I was giving a statement to police after witnessing an accident. Michael listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Jesus Christ. Neither of us cried. I think we were too old for dramatic collapse. Younger people still believe heartbreak arrives all at once like a tornado. Middle-aged people know it arrives in layers. Shock first, then humiliation, then anger, then grief, then practical questions nobody wants to ask. Whose name is on what account? Who knows already? How long has this been happening? Michael stared down into his untouched coffee. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I'm not even surprised. That landed hard because I understood exactly what he meant. Over the last year, Thomas had become increasingly distracted at home. He guarded his phone, worked later, took better care of his appearance, started wearing a cologne he claimed one of his clients recommended. And Denise? Denise had become strangely impatient with ordinary life, restless, dissatisfied. She complained constantly about Michael's work hours, their routines, their aging house. Looking back now, it felt less like unhappiness and more like someone slowly stepping out of one life while secretly building another. Michael reached into his jacket pocket again and removed a folded bank statement. "This came to the house by mistake last month," he said. I unfolded it carefully. The account was in Denise's name only. Several large transfers had been made over the past 6 months. One of them came from a joint investment account Michael thought had been untouched for years. My stomach tightened. "She said she moved money around for taxes," he said. I believed her. "How much?" "About 40,000. I stared at the paper in my hands. Suddenly, the affair felt larger than sex, larger than secrecy. Money changes betrayal into strategy, and strategic betrayal means planning. I looked up slowly. "I think we need to assume they've been preparing for this." Michael nodded once immediately, like he had already reached the same conclusion on his drive over. The waitress returned and asked if we wanted food. Neither of us did. After she left, Michael lowered his voice. "We can't confront them yet." I studied him carefully. "You already thought about that." "Carol, if Denise realizes I know before I protect my business accounts, I could lose half of everything I built." He paused. "And Thomas handles investments for a living. You know damn well he's already 10 steps ahead financially." That hit me hard because it was true. For the first time since leaving the house, fear cut cleanly through the grief. Not fear of losing Thomas. Fear of losing the future I had spent 30 years helping build. Michael leaned back slowly in the booth. "We do this smart," he said quietly, "not emotional." Outside, the rain continued falling across the empty parking lot, while 2 middle-aged people sat across from each other, realizing their marriages had probably ended long before either of them knew it. And for the first time all afternoon, I felt something colder than heartbreak settling into place inside me. Patience. The next 3 days passed with a strange kind of normalcy that made everything feel worse. Thomas kissed my cheek goodbye every morning before work. Denise texted me recipes and photos of throw pillows she thought would look good in my guest room. I answered both of them politely while something inside me hardened inch by inch. At night, I lay awake beside my husband, listening to him breathe in the dark, and wondered how long a person could live 2 separate lives before forgetting which one was real. The answer apparently was at least 3 years. Michael and I spoke every evening after dinner. Never long, never emotional, mostly logistics, quiet observations, small discoveries that became impossible to ignore once we started looking. Patterns emerged quickly. Thomas suddenly had client dinners twice a month that always seemed to happen on Thursdays. Denise had unexplained weekends away tied to vague real estate conferences. There were charges on credit cards neither husband nor wife had ever noticed, because middle-aged marriages often run on trust more than scrutiny. Once people stop expecting betrayal, they stop checking receipts. By Friday, Michael had contacted an old friend named Larry Mendel, a forensic accountant in Hendersonville, who occasionally worked divorce cases for attorneys. He owes me a favor, Michael told me over the phone that evening. I didn't give details, just said I needed discretion. I was sitting alone in our den when he called. Thomas was upstairs showering after work. Through the ceiling vents, I could hear water running while I held another man's secret investigation file in my lap. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. What if we're wrong? I asked quietly. The silence on the other end lasted half a second too long. We're not wrong. No, we weren't. By then, I had already started finding things. Not obvious things. Thomas was too careful for that. But betrayal leaves fingerprints even when people think they've cleaned the room thoroughly. Saturday morning, while Thomas played golf with clients, I walked into his home office carrying a cup of coffee and the spare reading glasses I normally used for crossword puzzles. The office smelled faintly of leather and printer toner. Everything sat exactly where it belonged. Thomas had always believed organization was a form of discipline. I sat down at his desk and opened the bottom drawer where he kept old tax folders and bank statements. The first 20 minutes revealed nothing unusual. Then I found the credit card. It was hidden inside a folder labeled Insurance Documents. Different bank. Different account. Only his name on it. My hands went cold immediately. I copied the number down before putting everything back exactly where I found it. Then I went upstairs to our bedroom, shut the door, and logged into the online account portal using information I already knew Thomas would use. Our anniversary? He had used our anniversary date as the password for the card he used to cheat on me. I stared at the screen for a long moment after it opened. Then I started reading. Hotels in Charleston, Knoxville, Greenville, wine bars, spa weekends, jewelry stores. A cabin rental outside Gatlinburg last February during the exact week Thomas told me he was attending a financial conference in Raleigh. The affair wasn't reckless. It was established. Comfortable. Practiced. I sat there on the edge of my bed while autumn sunlight moved slowly across the carpet and realized something deeply humiliating. They had not been sneaking around. They had been living around me. By the time Thomas came home from golf that afternoon, I had already printed 42 pages of statements from the hidden account and sealed them inside a manila envelope beneath winter sweaters in the attic. He walked into the kitchen, smiling. "You should have come out with us," he said. "Beautiful weather once the rain cleared." I looked at him standing there in his navy pullover and damp golf shoes, and felt a kind of grief so old and tired it barely resembled anger anymore. Instead, I smiled gently and asked if he wanted lasagna for dinner. That night after he fell asleep, I went downstairs and cried quietly into a dish towel at the kitchen sink, because I did not want him hearing me through the walls. Sunday afternoon, Michael called again. His voice sounded strange. Larry found something. I drove to a grocery store parking lot before calling him back from my car. Neither of us trusted speaking openly inside our homes anymore. "What is it?" He says Denise moved money out of our joint accounts over the last 18 months. Michael paused heavily. "A lot of money." "How much?" "Almost 80,000. I shut my eyes. "Oh my God. There's more." The words came slower after that. Larry had traced several transfers connected to a small property investment company based outside Charlotte. One of the investors listed on preliminary documents was Thomas Whitaker. The other was Denise Harper. For a moment I forgot how to breathe properly. "A property investment. Condo development," Michael said quietly. "Looks like they were planning to buy in early and flip units later." "Number." "I'm sorry, Carol." I gripped the steering wheel harder. The affair suddenly shifted shape in my mind. Affairs are one thing, temporary insanity, loneliness, weakness. But investments? Future planning. That meant intention. That meant eventually leaving. I looked across the parking lot at an elderly couple unloading groceries together beneath the fading evening light. The man steadied the cart while his wife adjusted her scarf against the wind. Ordinary loyalty. The simplest thing in the world. And somehow the rarest. "I found something too," I told Michael quietly. I explained about the hidden credit card, the hotels, the jewelry, the trips. He listened silently. Then he asked the question both of us had been avoiding. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I leaned back against the headrest and stared through the windshield. "At least 2 years," I whispered. Michael exhaled slowly. "Larry thinks closer to 3. 3 years. 3 Christmases. 3 anniversaries. 3 summers smiling in family photos while our spouses built another life behind our backs." My chest tightened unexpectedly when I thought about Emily. Our daughter still came home for Sunday dinners twice a month. She still hugged Denise when she visited. She still called Thomas whenever her car made strange noises because she trusted her father completely. The thought of destroying that trust felt unbearable. But the thought of allowing her to build her understanding of love around a lie felt worse. Michael spoke again, lower this time. "There's one more thing." "What?" Larry found records showing Thomas met with a divorce attorney 6 months ago. Everything inside me went perfectly still. Not because I was shocked. Because suddenly horribly certain moments from the past year made sense all at once. Thomas becoming unusually agreeable. Thomas encouraging me to start yoga classes and lunch outings more often. Thomas asking vague questions about whether I'd ever considered downsizing after retirement. He wasn't drifting emotionally. He had been preparing operationally. I sat there gripping my phone while cold realization settled over me piece by piece. My husband had not been confused. He had been waiting. I did not confront Thomas after learning about the divorce attorney. That surprised even me. 20 years earlier, I probably would have exploded. I would have thrown papers across the kitchen and demanded explanations through tears and rage. But something changes in people after 50. You begin to understand that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. So instead I started preparing. Monday morning I woke before sunrise and made coffee while Thomas shaved upstairs. The kitchen windows were still dark, reflecting my own face back at me as the coffee machine hissed softly against the silence. I looked tired. Not dramatic movie tired. Real tired. The kind that settles into a woman slowly after years of carrying emotional weight quietly so nobody else has to. Thomas came downstairs wearing a charcoal suit and one of the blue ties Emily bought him last Christmas. He kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly while reaching for his travel mug. "You sleep okay?" he asked. "Yes." A lie answering a lie. He glanced at his watch. "I may be late tonight. Client dinner." I buttered toast carefully without looking at him. Of course. Then he left the house carrying the same leather briefcase I had given him for our 20th anniversary. The garage door closed behind him. Only after his car disappeared down the driveway did I allow myself to stop moving. I stood very still in the kitchen for nearly a full minute before finally walking upstairs to our bedroom and opening the closet where I kept an old shoebox filled with addresses and business cards accumulated over decades. Near the bottom was a cream-colored card with gold lettering. Patricia Sloan, Family Law, Attorney Charlotte and Asheville offices. Patricia and I had gone to college together at UNC Chapel Hill before life carried us in different directions. We weren't close anymore, but over the years we exchanged Christmas cards and occasional updates about children, aging parents, surgeries, marriages. 3 years earlier, she had represented a friend of mine in a particularly brutal divorce and dismantled the husband so efficiently people still talked about it at dinner parties. I stared at the card for a long time before calling. Her assistant answered first. Then Patricia herself came on the line less than 2 minutes later. "Carol Whitaker," she said warmly. "Well now, this usually means either terrible news or a class reunion." I almost laughed. Probably the first one. Silence. Then her voice changed instantly into something more focused. "When can you come see me?" That afternoon I drove to her Asheville office downtown near Pack Square. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. Patricia looked almost exactly the same as she had in college, except sharper somehow. Gray streaks threaded elegantly through dark hair cut neatly at her jawline, and she wore glasses low on her nose while reviewing paperwork at her desk. She hugged me once before closing the office door. "Start from the beginning," she said. So I did. The affair, the hidden accounts, the investment property, the divorce attorney consultation. The room grew quieter the longer I spoke. When I finished, Patricia leaned back slowly in her chair and folded both hands together. "How much documentation do you currently have?" 42 pages of statements, hotel charges, transfers, investment records. "And your husband works in finance?" "Yes." "That complicates things." My stomach tightened slightly. Patricia noticed immediately. "Not because you're vulnerable," she clarified calmly. Because men in finance usually believe they're the smartest person in the room. That sounded painfully accurate. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown traffic below. Carol, listen carefully to me. Right now your advantage is timing. He does not know you know. The moment that changes the game, changes. Game. I hated the word. But she wasn't wrong. Patricia spent the next hour outlining practical steps with the same calm precision a surgeon might use explaining a difficult procedure. Copy all financial documents quietly. Photograph valuables. Protect retirement distributions. Monitor joint accounts daily. Do not confront emotionally. Do not threaten. Do not warn. People become dangerous when they think they're about to lose control, she said quietly. Thomas isn't dangerous. No, Patricia said, but desperate people often surprise us. Before I left, she handed me a legal pad filled with notes. Then she paused. There's something else you need to prepare for. I looked at her carefully. He may try to make this about your health. I felt my chest tighten immediately. The cardiology appointments. The medication. The mild arrhythmia diagnosis from last year. Patricia saw understanding flash across my face. He works in wealth management, she continued gently. Men like Thomas build narratives. If he consulted an attorney already, he's been thinking strategically for months. You need to start documenting stability now. Medical compliance, daily routines, emotional consistency. I stared down at the legal pad in my hands. Marriage ending was one thing. Realizing your husband had possibly been planning the framing of your emotional credibility was another entirely. When I got home, I sat in my parked car for almost 10 minutes before going inside. The house looked peaceful from the driveway. Wind moved softly through the maple trees in the front yard. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower hummed faintly in the distance. Ordinary suburban life. I wondered how many homes in America contained hidden wars no one else could see. Inside, I found a vase of fresh flowers sitting on the kitchen counter. White roses. My favorite. There was a note beside them in Thomas's handwriting. Thought you could use something beautiful today. Love you, T. I stared at the note until my vision blurred. Not because I believed him anymore. Because part of me suddenly understood that he probably believed himself. People who live double lives survive by compartmentalizing reality into separate rooms. Love in one room, lies in another. Guilt locked somewhere far away where they rarely have to touch it. That night after Thomas fell asleep, I sat downstairs reviewing account records again when my phone vibrated softly. Michael, you awake? He asked. Yes. I moved the business reserve account today. I understood immediately. Good. Larry thinks Denise may have access to more than I realized. The exhaustion in his voice made him sound older than 56. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, I keep replaying little things in my head. Me too. Did you ever think they were capable of this? I looked around the dark kitchen. The white roses sat beneath soft under-cabinet lighting like something from a funeral arrangement. No, I admitted. Michael sighed heavily. Larry found another property showing. What do you mean? Thomas and Denise toured condos in Greenville 2 months ago. I shut my eyes. Not hotel rooms now. Homes. Future tense. The affair had evolved beyond secrecy. They had been building an exit. And suddenly, for the first time since this began, I no longer felt grief rising inside me. I felt anger. Cold. Focused. Useful? By the second week of November, I had become someone I barely recognized. Not colder exactly. More precise? I started waking early every morning before Thomas, sitting alone in the kitchen with coffee while darkness still covered the backyard, mentally reviewing bank accounts the way some people review grocery lists. I knew exactly how much sat in checking savings retirement investments. I knew which accounts had unusual movement and which ones Patricia advised me not to touch yet. It was astonishing how quickly survival could become routine. Thomas, meanwhile, behaved almost lovingly. That was the cruelest part. Once people decide to leave a marriage emotionally, they often become gentler because guilt imitates tenderness. He brought me coffee without asking, complimented my hair after a salon appointment, suggested weekend trips we never actually planned. One night he stood behind me while I washed dishes and rubbed my shoulders softly. You've seemed stressed lately, he said. I nearly dropped the plate in my hands. Not because of the touch. Because I realized he was monitoring me the same way I was monitoring him. Watching for signs. Calculating timelines. Trying to determine whether I suspected anything. I smiled faintly and said I was probably just tired from my heart medication. His eyes flickered for half a second. There it was. Patricia had been right. He filed that information away immediately. 3 days later, Emily came over for dinner. Our daughter had Thomas's dark hair, but my eyes. At 26, she already carried the kind of exhaustion only ICU nurses truly understand. She arrived wearing navy scrubs under a winter coat and looked relieved just to sit down at the kitchen table. "You two okay?" she asked casually while accepting a glass of wine. The question hit me like a physical blow. Across the table, Thomas smiled naturally. "Why wouldn't we be?" Emily shrugged lightly. "I don't know. You both seem weird lately." Children know long before parents think they do. Even grown children. I focused carefully on serving roasted chicken while keeping my expression neutral. "Your father's been busy," I said, "and I've had doctor appointments." Thomas looked at me briefly when I mentioned the appointments. Tiny, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Emily accepted the explanation easily enough, though I caught her studying us more than once throughout dinner. She talked about difficult patients, long shifts, a travel nursing opportunity one of her friends accepted in Colorado. Normal conversation. Meanwhile, her parents sat across from each other carrying enough secrets to collapse a house. After she left, Thomas helped clear dishes unusually fast. Then he said casually, "By the way, I'll be in Charlotte this weekend." There it was. I kept my back turned while rinsing wine glasses. For work? Client conference? What hotel? The question slipped out before I could stop it. A beat of silence passed behind me. "Westin Uptown, I think?" I nodded slowly. Because Larry had already told Michael exactly which luxury condo property Thomas and Denise planned to tour Saturday morning. In Charlotte, at 11 o'clock. I dried the wine glass carefully and forced my breathing to stay even. "You okay?" Thomas asked. "Yes." Another lie sliding quietly across the kitchen. That night after he fell asleep, I went downstairs and called Michael. "He's going this weekend," I said immediately. "So is Denise." Neither of us sounded surprised anymore. Michael had changed over the past 2 weeks. The grief remained, but beneath it another version of him had surfaced. Sharper, more deliberate, like a man slowly waking from anesthesia. "Larry finished the forensic review," he said quietly. I sat down at the kitchen table, and he found almost $130,000 moved between hidden accounts, investments, and business transfers. I closed my eyes. "Jesus," Michael continued. "Denise used business reimbursements to funnel money gradually. Larry says she was careful enough that I probably never would have noticed until after everything was gone. And Thomas, he's worse." That did not surprise me either. Thomas understood systems, financial structure, timing, risk exposure. A man like that would never leave evidence accidentally. "What else?" I asked. Michael exhaled slowly. "They were planning to buy a condo together by spring." For a moment I said nothing. Outside the kitchen windows, cold wind rattled branches against the dark. Somewhere upstairs, my husband slept peacefully while another man quietly explained the architecture of my marriage collapsing. "Did Larry say when they intended to leave?" I asked. "No exact timeline." Michael paused. "But he thinks they were building liquidity first." Liquidity. Such a clean financial word for betrayal. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "What do we do now?" Michael's answer came immediately. "We finish this. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Finish it properly." The next morning I met Patricia again. She reviewed the newest financial documents with frightening efficiency, highlighting transactions and making notes in the margins while speaking calmly about asset protection and filing procedures. At one point she removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Carol, I need you to understand something very clearly." I waited. "Your husband planned this carefully enough that he assumed you would react emotionally." She tapped the papers lightly. "Men like Thomas rely on chaos. Confusion benefits the prepared person." I stared at the file. "So what benefits me?" Patricia's expression remained perfectly calm. "Discipline." The word settled heavily into the room. She recommended filing immediately after the Charlotte trip. Simultaneous financial freezes, immediate separation of accounts, temporary occupancy orders for the house. Everything coordinated. Everything controlled. "No scenes," Patricia said. "No emotional warning shots. By the time he realizes what's happening, the legal structure needs to already be moving." As I left her office, she stopped me near the door. "One more thing." I turned back. "Do not underestimate your husband simply because he underestimated you first." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Friday evening arrived cold and windy. Thomas packed casually for Charlotte while talking about restaurant reservations and networking dinners that did not exist. I stood in our bedroom doorway watching him fold shirts into a leather overnight bag. 27 years. That was what 27 years looked like in the end. Not screaming, not shattered plates, just a man calmly packing clothes for a weekend with another woman, while his wife watched silently from 10 feet away. He zipped the bag shut and smiled at me. "I'll be back Sunday." I smiled back gently. "Drive safely." At midnight, after he fell asleep beside me for the last time as my husband, without knowing it, my phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. A text from Michael. Larry confirmed their condo showing. "Saturday, 11 a.m. You ready?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Yes. And for the first time since hearing Denise laugh upstairs in my house, I truly meant it. The confrontation happened on a Sunday evening in late November. Cold rain tapped steadily against the dining room windows, while soft jazz played through the speakers Thomas had installed years earlier when we still hosted Christmas parties for neighbors and church friends. I had lit candles, set the table properly, used the good plates from our anniversary collection. If someone had looked through the windows from outside, they would have seen 4 middle-aged adults sitting down for an elegant dinner together. They would never have guessed 2 marriages were about to end. Thomas arrived home from Charlotte around 4 that afternoon, carrying bakery pastries, and wearing the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his life was still under control. "Smells incredible in here," he said, loosening his coat. "What's the occasion?" "I invited Michael and Denise for dinner." That caught his attention for half a second. Only half, then he smiled naturally again. "Nice, haven't done that in a while." No, we hadn't. Not since the 4 of us stopped being who we pretended to be. Denise arrived first, just after 6, wearing a cream-colored sweater and gold earrings Thomas had purchased 6 months earlier from a jewelry store in Greenville. She hugged me when she walked inside. Actually hugged me. "You look beautiful," she said warmly. The level of deception required to say something like that while sleeping with another woman's husband would have impressed me if it hadn't disgusted me so completely. "You too," I answered calmly. Michael arrived 10 minutes later carrying a bottle of wine. He looked steady, calm, controlled. Only someone paying close attention would have noticed how tight his jaw was. Dinner began almost pleasantly. That was the surreal part. Thomas discussed market trends with Michael while Denise complimented the rosemary chicken I served. Rain slid softly down the windows behind them while candles flickered across polished silverware. 27 years of marriage had trained me to read my husband instinctively, and throughout dinner I noticed small changes in him. Tiny flashes of distraction. Denise avoiding eye contact a little too carefully. Thomas checking whether Michael seemed unusually quiet. They were watching us. Because guilty people always assume everyone else might secretly know. Halfway through dinner, Denise laughed at something Michael said, and suddenly I remembered hearing that same laugh upstairs in my bedroom. Comfortable. Careless. Intimate. Something inside me settled completely after that. I stood slowly from the table. "I made coffee," I said. "Why don't we move into the living room?" Nobody objected. The 4 of us carried coffee cups into the den where a fire burned softly in the stone fireplace. Outside, wind rattled bare tree branches against the dark. I sat in the armchair beside the fireplace while the others settled onto couches opposite me. Then I reached beside my chair and lifted the leather portfolio Patricia had prepared. And suddenly the room changed. Thomas noticed first. His eyes sharpened immediately. Denise went still beside him. Michael said nothing. I opened the portfolio calmly and removed a stack of photographs. Then I placed the first one on the coffee table. Denise kissing Thomas outside the condo showroom in Charlotte. No one spoke. I placed down another. Hotel receipts. Another. Bank transfers. Another. The hidden investment partnership paperwork. The silence became enormous. Thomas stared at the documents without touching them, while all color slowly drained from Denise's face. Michael remained perfectly still beside her. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. "How long have you known?" Denise whispered. "Not, I'm sorry." "Not, please explain." "Not, this isn't what it looks like." "How long have you known?" That told me everything. "Long enough," I said calmly, "to stop both of you from taking anything else from us." Thomas finally looked up at me fully. For 27 years I had watched that man navigate financial negotiations, business conflicts, investment crises. He had always believed composure gave him power. Now I watched him realize he was no longer controlling the room. "Carol," he said carefully, "I think we need to discuss this privately." "No," Michael said quietly. Thomas looked at him. Michael leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on his knees. "You lost the right to private discussions somewhere around year 3 of the affair." Denise flinched visibly. Thomas recovered quickly, though. Of course he did. Men like him survive by reorganizing narratives in real time. This situation is obviously emotional, he began calmly. But before anyone makes decisions. Stop, I said softly. And to his credit, he actually did. I looked directly at him across the firelight. You met with a divorce attorney 6 months ago. His expression changed instantly. There are records of the condo investment, the hidden accounts, the transfers. I tilted my head slightly. You were planning to leave eventually, weren't you? Neither he nor Denise answered. Michael reached into his jacket pocket then and placed another folder on the coffee table. Larry's forensic accounting report, he said quietly. Turns out Denise moved over $100,000 through hidden accounts and reimbursements. Denise's breathing became uneven. Michael looked at her with the exhaustion of a man whose grief had finally burned itself into clarity. You used our grandchildren's college savings as transition money for your affair. That landed harder than anything else so far. Denise started crying immediately. Real tears this time. I was going to put it back, she whispered weakly. Michael actually laughed once at that. Not cruelly, just in disbelief. Thomas turned toward me again. You hired people to investigate me. Yes. Jesus Christ, Carol. No, I said quietly. Jesus Christ was probably busy. For the first time all evening, Michael almost smiled. Thomas rubbed one hand across his mouth, slowly recalculating. I could practically see it happening behind his eyes. Damage assessment, financial exposure, legal positioning. What exactly do you want? He finally asked. That question surprised me. Not because of the wording, because he still thought this was a negotiation. I reached calmly into the portfolio one final time and removed a thick envelope. Then I handed it directly to him. He opened it slowly and stopped breathing for a second when he saw Patricia Sloane's name at the top. Filed Friday morning. Asset freeze requests. Temporary separation orders. Occupancy protections. Everything already moving. Denise stared at the paperwork in horror. Thomas looked at me differently then. Not lovingly. Not angrily. Respectfully. Like a man finally understanding the person sitting across from him. You planned this, he said quietly. I held his gaze steadily. No, I answered. You planned this. The room went silent again except for rain against the windows and firewood settling softly in the hearth. Then I looked at Denise. You were my family, I said. And for the first time all evening my voice almost broke. Denise covered her face with both hands and started crying harder. But strangely I felt no satisfaction watching it. Only exhaustion. Thomas stared down at the divorce papers for a long time before finally asking the one question that mattered most. What happens now? Michael stood slowly from the couch. Now, he said quietly, you both get to live the lives you worked so hard to build. 6 months later, the house was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just honest. That was the word I kept coming back to that spring whenever I sat alone at the kitchen table with coffee before sunrise. Honest. The rooms no longer carried the tension of a man pretending to be present while planning his exit. The air felt lighter even on rainy mornings. Maybe homes are like people. Maybe they know when the lying has stopped. The divorce was finalized in May. Patricia handled it the way she handled everything, with a calm efficiency that made Thomas's attorney look permanently unprepared. The financial records did most of the talking. Hidden accounts, secret credit cards, the condo investment. The timing of his consultation with a divorce lawyer months before I discovered the affair. By the time Thomas tried to paint the marriage as mutually distant, Patricia had already placed 3 years of receipts transfers and hotel reservations in front of the mediator. Thomas did not lose everything. Life is rarely that neat, but he lost the version of the future he had designed for himself in private. He lost the house. He lost more of the retirement account than he expected. He lost the respect of our daughter for a while, and that hurt him more than the money, though he never would have admitted it. Emily found out 2 days after the dinner. I told her myself at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug I never drank from. I did not tell her the ugly details, not all of them. A daughter does not need every picture her mother had to see. But I told her enough. She sat very still while I spoke. When I finished, she looked toward the hallway where family photographs still hung in neat frames. Beach vacations, Christmas mornings, her college graduation. Thomas standing beside me with his hand on my shoulder, smiling like a man who had built something solid. Then she said, "How long did you know before you told me?" "Long enough to protect myself," I said. She nodded slowly. Then her face folded in a way I had not seen since she was a little girl, and she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me. That was when I finally cried the way I had not allowed myself to cry before. Not because the marriage was over, because my daughter still knew where to find me. Michael and I stayed in touch through the legal process. Not romantically. People always want to turn shared pain into something prettier than it is. What we had was not romance. It was witness. He knew the exact shape of that betrayal because he had stood in the same wreckage. Denise's divorce became uglier than mine. Michael's accountant uncovered more than even Larry had expected. Business funds, reimbursement tricks, savings moved in pieces small enough to look harmless until someone lined them up in order. Denise tried crying first, then blaming loneliness, then blaming Michael's work schedule. None of it changed the numbers. Their children were grown, but grandchildren were involved, and that made people choose sides faster than anyone expected. Denise had spent years building an image of herself as the generous, stylish woman who always brought the best wine and remembered birthdays. It turned out people forgive weakness more easily than calculation. By June, she had moved into a rental townhouse near Greenville. Thomas rented an apartment outside Charlotte near his office. He emailed me twice after the settlement. Both messages were carefully written, regretful without being fully accountable. I answered neither. There is a kind of apology that still wants something. Peace, maybe. Permission. A softer memory. I was not interested in helping him feel better about breaking my life open. But I did not hate him forever either. That surprised me. Hatred takes stamina, and by 50 I had learned to spend my energy more carefully. I planted hydrangeas along the back fence instead. I repainted the guest room a pale green. I donated Thomas's old golf jackets to a church rummage sale and kept the blue ceramic bowl his mother had given us because I still liked it and refused to let betrayal decide what I was allowed to keep. One Saturday morning in July, Emily came over wearing old jeans and her hair in a messy bun. She brought biscuits, peach jam, and 2 paint rollers. "We're doing the kitchen today," she announced. I looked around at the cream-colored walls Thomas had chosen 15 years earlier because he said neutral colors helped resale value. "What color?" She held up a paint card. "Soft yellow." I started laughing before I could stop myself. "What?" she asked. "Your father would have hated that." Emily smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good." We painted until our shoulders ached. We got yellow paint on the trim, the floor, and once somehow on the dog, even though I did not own a dog. It belonged to my neighbor and had wandered in through the open back door like it understood the house needed company. That evening after Emily left, I stood in the middle of my bright, imperfect kitchen and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. Permission. A few days later, a card arrived in the mail from Michael. His handwriting was blocky and careful. "Carol, I don't know if people like us ever really thank each other properly for days like that, but I want you to know something. The day you called me was the worst day of my life, and the first day I stopped being lied to. That matters. You gave me the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I won't forget it." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it. Then I placed the card in the drawer where I had once kept Thomas's anniversary letters. It did not erase them. It outweighed them. That is what I learned from all of it. Revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is just refusing to protect the lie anymore. Sometimes it is walking out of your own house in the rain instead of walking upstairs in anger. Sometimes it is making one phone call to the person who deserves the truth as much as you do. At 50 years old, I learned something painful about love. But I learned something beautiful about myself. I learned that kindness is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And a woman can have her heart broken in her own hallway and still be the calmest person in the room. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to know where you're listening from and what you would have done in my place. Share your thoughts below because sometimes one honest story helps another person feel less alone. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, family truth, and the kind of justice that arrives slowly but surely, subscribe and come back for the next one.